Hi everyone, my name is Camilla and I'm going to talk about the symbolic interactionism theory. This theory has been commonly used since the early 1900s and it's thought to be so popular due to being adaptable in every time period. George Herbert Mead is the most well-known influencer of this theory, and he focused mostly on the self. He also considered the concept of gestures to be much more broad than other researchers. He thought things such as facial expressions or even language could be considered to be gestures. This theory is believed to first be used in family science around 1918, and it's provided a framework to study social interaction from a scientific perspective. It was around this time that people began to study family in the same way that other scientists study things like molecules or specimen. Similar to George Mead, several researchers who helped develop this theory focused on the self. The self is one of the most commonly researched parts of this theory. According to our textbook, an important aspect of the self is, quote, the need for interaction with and confirmation by others to develop the self, which is thought by some to lead a self that is anxious. This anxiety is caused by a desire to be accepted by others, end quote. This relates to the concept of impression management, which we will further discuss here in a couple of minutes. This theory has been commonly used by pragmatic philosophers in the United States. Pragmatics believed the world to be ever-changing, which later became an important idea in this theory. Pragmatics contributed 4 ideas to this theory. 1. The world is always changing. 2. Social structure is constantly changing. 3. Meanings come from our own interactions with objects. And 4. Research can help us to understand how societies change and evolve. This theory has 3 overarching themes. The first overarching theme focuses on the idea that meaning is a central element of human behavior. Let's discuss the basic assumptions given in this first theme. Number 1. People have different reactions to things depending on their own personal meaning of the thing. For example, at a dinner table, at the side of a wine bottle, one person might be extremely excited and pour themselves a glass of wine, but another person at the same table refuses. That person probably has bad experiences with alcohol. Maybe alcoholism runs in their family, or they've witnessed extreme bad behavior, while the other person doesn't think negatively of alcohol consumption at all. Number 2. Our interactions with others teaches us about meaning. Most researchers agree that meaning is completely learned through our own various social interactions. And 3. People interpret what is being learned as they come into contact with various objects and experiences. We take active roles in controlling our own environments. We choose the environments to which we want to respond and remain. The second overarching theme focuses on self-concept or our sense of self, so we'll go over those basic assumptions of this theme. Number 1, infants are antisocial. In other words, we are not born knowing who we are, and behavior is learned. Number 2, we are motivated by our sense of self. We reflect on our experiences and use them to guide our future behavior. Our textbook says that once we develop our sense of self, we will use this and be motivated by this as we determine any future behaviors. The third overarching theme focuses more on society, so let's talk about those basic assumptions. Number 1, people are influenced by their society. Cultural norms affect the way we behave. While we are heavily influenced by our own sense of self, we are also heavily influenced by the culture that surrounds us. Our behavior can be determined by the expected behavior in our culture. Number 2, we learn the values and norms of society by having regular interactions within our culture. In other words, we can't just rely on what we read or what other people tell us for us to develop a sense of how to behave. Now we can move on to the primary terms and concepts of this theory. Let's talk first about symbols. Everything is a symbol for something, but they are not always universal. The meaning of symbols is defined by our own interactions with those symbols. For example, in the South, it's common to be called terms of endearment like sweetie, honey, or baby by people you don't even know. But in other places, this might not be so welcome, or it could even be thought of as demeaning or maybe even too intimate. Another example of this would be college football. In Georgia, where I grew up, people tend to associate a capital letter G with the University of Georgia or Georgia football. However, if you are not a football fan or you don't live in Georgia, you would probably just think it's the letter G. Symbols relate back to the first basic assumption and the first overarching theme. It says that we assign different meanings to symbols depending on our own experiences with that symbol. Interaction is defined as social behavior between two or more people. This can be related to the second basic assumption that says that our interactions with others influence us. Gestures are a form of nonverbal communication. They're actions that represent other things. These are very similar to symbols and can be related back to the first and second basic assumptions that we just talked about. We rely on our experiences and interactions to determine what gestures might be appropriate. Our textbook defines social norms as expectations about how to act in a given situation. An example of this is when kids or teenagers are likely to behave much differently around their friends than they would be around their parents or teachers. I know in the field of education we see this all the time. This also relates back to that first assumption and the third overarching theme. Social norms vary depending on our culture. And this brings us to rituals. Rituals are traditions practiced by individuals or families. Now we can move on into roles. Self-defined roles influence our behavior in social situations. Our self-defined roles can be different from the roles that others impose on us. So this, of course, can affect the way others view us if we prioritize our self-defined roles over the roles that other people have assigned to us. This relates to the basic assumption that we're motivated by our own sense of self. Moving on to salience, this is how important any particular thing is to us at the moment. The degree to which we invest ourselves in something depends on how much salience that thing has to us. This concept relates back to roles and the basic assumption that we react differently to things depending on our own meaning of that thing. Impression management is also a very important concept. We adopt roles while in public because we care very much about others' opinions of us. This is what I mentioned earlier when we were talking about our need to be accepted by other people. Identity is very similar to self-defined roles. Our most salient roles are likely to define our identities. We learn about our identities through our interactions with other people and the roles we play in our lives and others' lives. This is also related to the concept of roles and the basic assumption that we're motivated by our own sense of self. Although this theory is very commonly used, there are a few criticisms of the symbolic interactionism theory. One of the current critiques is that there's a lack of biology studied. However, in my opinion, the benefits of this theory far outweigh the criticisms, but of course, there is always room for improvement. The symbolic interactionism theory is such an interesting theory to learn about and so helpful for us to know both as researchers and educators. I hope this presentation has helped you delve into this theory a little bit more. I know making it definitely helped me to gain a better understanding. Thanks for listening.